Security is a big issue, and we all face it, and we've been trying to come at it from multiple different attack vectors, right? There's many different things that we look at when it comes to security, whether it's the 96 billion connected things that we have out there, whether it's the mobile devices that we carry around, whether it's the network that we're connecting to, whether it's the silicon that is in our devices, whether it's the network equipment that we're using to connect to. There's many different types of attack surfaces that I've been involved with in the course of my career, from Cisco to Broadcom to Fortinet to Mobile Iron to SAP. There's many different ways that things can go wrong, as we all know. And take aside the technology aspect of things, and you're often being asked to validate the business purchase. Why are you buying this? Why do you need to have this product? You know, what's the return on investment? What problems are you going to solve? That's the questions that I posed somewhat, and I'll go through them to this panel. And so while we'll talk about technology, we're technologists, I think one of the bigger issues that we all face in the room, the elephants in the corner of the room are hung on the wall. I've got a funny cartoon about that. See me later if you want to see it. But the point is, we all have that issue, and we're all trying to get validation for budget that we want to spend on security. And so this panel is aimed to help you take something away to help you with your everyday job in budgeting for security and validating your security purchases. That's the gist of what this panel is about. There's data, people, devices, there's apps, there's security ROI. I've built a lot of ROI calculators on my teams over the years, and they've varied from focusing on people, focusing on network connectivity, bandwidth, et cetera. So we've got SyncDog, IBM, Checkpoint, and Gryphon Secure. And as I go through these questions, I've only got a couple questions, but I think you definitely will have some good responses, and I want to give you plenty of time. And I encourage people in the audience, ask security questions, right? We'll leave time to ask those questions. I think it's important that we ask those questions to these folks. This is why they're here, talking. It's, no offense about mobility. It's not just about these, right? It's about everything that's part of your network. And you've got many more different things than just mobility with IoT and the network configurations and the firewalls and the routers and the switches. There's many different parts of the infrastructure that you're working on. So with that, I'll start off with a first question. And my first question, you're lucky, Brian, you go first, is around enterprise security costs. They're quickly expanding above and beyond purchasing. And there's a ratio there. That can include enablement, implementation, resources, training, talent, ops. Metrics that I've seen in the industry put it as a 10-to-1 above the purchase price. So while you may think, oh, it costs, $50,000 for this product, well, what's the actual price that you're paying in your organization, and how do you communicate that? So how is your firm, Brian, and we'll go down the line to everybody on the panel, how is your firm helping customers driving down those costs?
Yeah, it's an interesting problem that everybody faces, because obviously security is very important to the environment or to your organization, but how do you build it in a way that it's easily adopted, easily used, and people are being pulled to it versus resisting it? And I think that's the biggest problem, is that we're still building solutions that are solving the security problem but not solving the user experience problem. And so people are resistant to it. They're finding workarounds. And so the training, the utilization, and that resistance is what's causing a lot of the problems. So what we're doing is trying to build a much more automated process of the onboarding process. And then, more importantly, trying to combine productivity with security. So people are encouraged and they want to come to that environment because it's gonna help their job. I always say that when people are still saying, I'll get back to that when I get back to the office, you've got a problem.
Yeah.
There's some disconnect that we're still not fulfilling.
The real-time enterprise, sorry to interrupt you, but the real-time enterprise is missing the real-time portion of this.
And that's exactly right. You still have people carrying multiple devices. You have people saying, I'll get back. You have multiple devices, yet you still can't fulfill that job outside the four walls of the organization.
Processes that, hey, just like we've heard from Vantic about the real-time process, we should be able to basically use that real-time process and get to what we want to do.
That's exactly right. So that's our focus, how to build something that's going to be, not only easily adopted, but people are going to want to adopt it because it's going to make their jobs easier.
Okay, and I should have encouraged you. Brian's from SyncDog, so as we go down the line, just say your name and which company you're from.
Brian Egenrieder, Chief Revenue Officer at SyncDog.
Great. So Jonathan from IBM. And I'll take a slightly different angle just to give the audience, a broad perspective of kind of some answers to this question. So from an IBM perspective.
You're saying I'm wrong.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Totally kidding.
No, you'll see it's totally different.
He's secure in his answer. It's okay.
So I think, we look at a question like that to say, what have our customers experienced over the last several years? And one big important factor that keeps coming up is time to value or time to success. And so you've made a purchase, and it doesn't matter what the cost of that purchase was. It does not matter if you're an SMB customer or an enterprise customer. It doesn't. You've made a purchase. You've put money out on the table. How quickly are you getting that solution deployed, and is it reaching its full potential? And I think many folks can relate here. You deployed an MDM solution. It can do everything. Right now it's UEM, right? It can do everything for you, but you only needed to do 3 things, right? How quickly did you get it up and running to do those 3 things? And we found at the largest enterprise levels, you need some professional services in order to make that time to value and time to success happen, because your environments are very complex. And even though this is such a basic technology that you're implementing, you need to get it right, and you need to get it right fast, right? Because that is your investment, and that is your money and your cost.
Are you encouraging customers to get it right in a certain way? Is there a template that you're helping your customers with?
You know what? It would be great if it was a template, and there's not a template.
Or customizable template. I shouldn't use
Sure.
template, yeah.
I think it's more understanding each individual customer's environment and what the challenges they have in their environment. Because let's talk an identity integration with APIs. You could have one of 4 or 5 different identity solutions, right? Mm-hmm. So yes, there's a template to say, here's how a solution integrates with your chosen identity solution. Yes, but it goes deeper than that, especially when you're dealing with cloud solutions and on-prem solutions and hybrid solutions and making them all connect. The last thing I'll say on this topic is, if you're an SMB customer, it's not about professional services. It's not about having the experts. It's about having more or less self-service tools. And you were hinting towards this, right? Making that experience easier. Because you're not going to, as an SMB customer, smaller customer, have lots of money to outlay. So you need a solution that is easy to adopt, that has more self-help features, that can just integrate, plug and play into what's in your environment. And I think that is what's needed to get that time to value and the time to success, right? If you're large, you're going to need some help from experts. If you're smaller, you're going to want to do things yourself to reduce cost or to save cost, but still get that time to value and success. And, I think most of us up here on the stage are working towards those goals.
Thanks, Adam. Tom Stasko at Checkpoint Software. What was the question again?
You're make me stand up, aren't you?
Yeah, no, just kidding. So we're talking about driving down costs and in IT. And I had a conversation a few months ago with a large retailer out in the Pacific Northwest. And they were saying, listen, we need to reduce our costs. We've got all these disparate security systems. I can't expect my team to become experts in 4, 5, 6 different security systems, and it's going to cost me a lot of money in training, right? Training and separate management consoles, et cetera. So at Checkpoint, we've brought together multiple solutions from Endpoint, et cetera, into a single product suite. So what that does is when you're talking to any larger vendor that brings in multiple products, right, it lowers the learning curve for the employees, right? And lower learning curves, less training costs, et cetera. Not to mention the management costs go down. So when you start looking at consolidation of your security products, it's going to drive costs down, both in training and in time to implement.
Awesome. Troy?
Good. And Troy Stark, I'm a Vice President of Business Development at Gryphon Secure. Gryphon is largely a privacy and communication security company, and largely what we see within the users and the people that we work with is a lot of challenges around the functional usability of security. And when users think about how they want to work and how they want to function and get their job done, there's a lot of concern about security creating a barrier to them to doing what they need to do. And that's where we see people trying to get around security rules. They're really trying to do their job. And that's the role that we have to fix as security vendors, is figuring out how do we make these things easier for people to adopt that are designed to function in the ways that a modern workforce thinks about. You know, when we talk about, you know, managing devices, for example, I remember years ago it was the containerization approach, and then it didn't interface with your native email, and it didn't do a bunch of these sort of native tasks, and people had to go to a different application, and that just presented some barriers for people. Over time, these things have matured. They've become a lot more robust and a lot more capable, and start adding more productivity capabilities into that. So the industry is responding to this stuff. But we are focused on making sure that it ties into what are the natural uses that people already have and what they already use and know and are already familiar with. And then we start thinking about, well, how do we integrate this back into the company? And I think more to Jonathan's point, we provide what we call our reference architecture. Out of the box, everything you need to get up and running, we will deploy, set up, and install for you and get it going right away. But if you want to customize that and you want to change that, you want it to work with your specific MDM, you want to use your own PKI infrastructure, you want to change the SIP services that are being used, we can customize all these things to get you the right value footprint that you need to be successful. But if you need to go fast and you need to get there, we have got it out of the box all handled for you. So I think a lot of this is the flexibility and the ability to move into different areas that make sense for individual organizations and looking at their specific requirements and figuring out how do we make this easy from any angle that we can. Because at the end of the day, what people start telling me, well, when is enough enough? You know, how much security do I need, and will I really be safe? You know, there's no answer to that, really, right? We need to figure out what is the value, what's the ROI we're going to get, or what are your crown jewels we're trying to protect, and put the right protections around that, and then make that something that's quick, simple, and efficient, ultimately, for the users and for the administrators and people that need to work with it.
Yeah, it's actually a good point. I mean, one of the big issues that I think most of the enterprises face that you folks represent is shadow IT. And shadow IT is a real deal. It's a really, really big issue dating back to, you know, when networks first became a big deal in your corporations. It isn't just mobile, right? It's first you had, you know, the LANs and the WANs, and then you had all these different devices, including mobility. Now you've got IoT. You've got successive generations of devices, and that's kind of what led to my next question, including what Jack Madden talked about with voice. I think it's a really good point, that voice is not only a great benefit to people, as Jack pointed out, but I think that there's yet another attack surface there that we should all be thinking about, right? Everybody's heard about, you know, the DDoS and all the botnets and those issues that are going around, and even Amazon Alexa, you know, got hacked supposedly with people's voices. Well, just like the sneakers thing that Jack talked about, yeah, you could use your voice as your identification, but that cuts both ways from an authentication mechanism. So, second question, and we'll start with Troy at the end. There's a measurable business ROI of security. How does your firm help customers determine that figure based on industry, number of users or endpoints, and company size? Will the cloud ultimately drive down costs, right? We hear from all the big cloud vendors, and we've heard from several of them during the conference, right, with Microsoft up on stage, but we've all talked about Amazon, we've talked about Google as well. Are the cloud vendors going to help you drive down costs and meet the majority of your customers' requirements securely, and how?
Right. So I think it's a challenging question to answer. I think, you know, cloud by nature is largely insecure in terms of, at least in our business and the types of things that we focus on in terms of communications. But ultimately, security is a representation of, do you trust the people that you work with? And do you trust your vendors? Do you trust the people that host your data or manage your servers or have physical access to these things? And so cloud obviously represents a lot of opportunity to rationalize out a lot of costs and to be able to move a lot of the complexities to somebody who should be able to specialize in these things. So what we are focused on providing is not so much generic cloud solutions. And so today we don't actually work with Amazon AWS or Microsoft Azure and things like this. We look at who are the trusted partners in this ecosystem that have the pedigree specific to the use case and application that we're providing. And so we think about, who are the people that our customers are going to trust to be able to do that. Because I give the example, like people tell me, well, WhatsApp is generally secure. It encrypts all my messages. Things are going back and forth. It's off in the cloud. It's owned by Facebook. But there's this weird Chinese wall that sits between Facebook and WhatsApp, right? So it's fine. And so, there's a certain amount of truth to that. I mean, but at the end of the day, do you trust the people that have access, physical access to those communications and servers? And do you know who is able to subpoena that information and from what countries and regions that might reside? I mean, these are all the types of questions that we need to think about when people are using these tools in business to communicate. They're using them today to conduct business, and they're sending potentially quite sensitive information that could make or break your business, could be going through Facebook servers today. And are we providing the tools and the capabilities to be able to do that? And then do we want to do it all ourselves, right? So this goes back to who's our trusted partner that's going to enable us to do that? Who's going to give us the right infrastructure, the right capabilities, and the right visibility into what's actually taking place? And I think this starts tying then into some of the ROI and the other part of the question, right? I mean, calculating our ROI in security is maybe a bit of black magic. I don't know. I'm not really sure.
It's hard, but everybody's being asked. I mean, that's why it's a hard question.
Right?
People in the audience, they have budgets that they're asking for to purchase security, and you folks are a big part of that budget, and they're being asked to kind of quantify, why do you need this?
Right, and so what's been interesting to me, most recently, I've been doing some more work with insurance companies around underwriting of the policies and what they do, and we're looking at what are the types of things that we can understand from that. Because I guess I assume insurance companies are good at quantifying risk in some sense of form, right? And so when we think about, what are the assets or, variable information that we need to protect, and what is the value of that information, and then layer that against the risk. In my context, it's where are you going with this information, and who are you sending to, and what networks are you on when you're sending it? This starts giving you, some pluggable data set metrics that you can add into an Excel spreadsheet and quantify some type of risk. How valuable is that to you on some type of factor? And you can spit out a mathematical formula based on that. It's not an exact science, but it gives you an idea of, how you might be able to try to quantify something like this and put it together. So that's somewhat how we think about these things.
Awesome.
So Adam, when we see ROI on security, it's not that unless you're a security vendor, you're not making money off of security, right? You're trying to reduce your risk. And in going to the cloud, I think it's been more of you're increasing your chances of risk, right? For example, if you've seen City of Atlanta, you've seen up north Colorado Department of Transportation, et cetera, these recent hacks that have happened, the ransomware attacks, these were caused because they went to the cloud too fast and they weren't able to properly secure. So you've got the business saying, hey, we want to reduce costs, get this product out to the cloud because we're going to reduce our costs. It's very superficial.
The business manager that these folks work with will say, hey, I've heard the cloud can save me a lot of costs. Let's go to the cloud right away.
Yes, so they see that instant savings, but they don't see the iceberg of risk underneath of there. And the examples are tenfold of cloud, of regular companies that have pushed their product to the cloud, not properly secured it, and have paid the price.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, these guys said, I think, it very well so far, so I'm not going to add too much. I think if you're trying to understand and figure out where you're getting budget for, if that's a challenge in an organization, you can easily look at some public regulations, GDPR as an example, to justify
that's a good one.
Right, the spend or reducing the risk, or you can look at the fines levied across these regulations, and regulations are not new to our industry. GDPR is just one of the latest ones we've all been preparing for.
Latest chapter.
Yeah, exactly, and there'll be more, I'm sure, at some point. Fines will get heavier in some industries and whatnot, but as a marketer, when a salesperson comes to me and says, hey, we need an ROI calculator for this specific product, I roll my eyes because I say, man, then we have a product that's not needed out there if we have to have a hard sell like that. Right?
It's
There are some
helping,
products
it's helping these folks though, because oftentimes, just to push back on you a little bit, they'll be asked to say, hey, you want to spend $50,000 on this? I thought you have these 3 other security products. Why do you need this?
So I think where we engage with customers in that respect is you can't have, this goes back to the first question, you can't just have a blind ROI calculator that works for everybody.
That's right.
We've done this, especially comparing cloud costs to on-prem infrastructure, because you can play with those numbers all day and you can have one side win or the other side win, whatever you feel like winning, right, for that day. And so it comes down to what are you really trying to accomplish in your environment? If it's identifying the abnormality that's going to lead to your data breach, guess what? We could show you that ROI, and we can show you that having some type of AI solution to be able to detect those and automatically provide that to your staff so you're not going numb with hundreds of thousands of alerts every single day, we can show that type of ROI, right? And in some cases, that might be what you're looking for. And I think most of us as security companies are prepared to engage with you on that. But it's going to be a personal engagement, right? And what matters most in your environment so that you can turn around and be our champion with the product you want and the vendor you want and go to your boss or your management or your board and say, this is why we need this spend. We are going to solve this problem with this technology, and that's how we're going to make it happen.
Yeah, I always say trying to turn security into an ROI is like trying to look at your auto insurance and saying, how can I make that an investment strategy? I mean, it just doesn't go hand in hand. But I'll go back to how I started with combining your security solution with a productivity solution, turning mobility where we really focus, turning that solution into a way that people can start producing data on mobile devices instead of consuming. How do you tie in third-party contractors and people that aren't even affiliated with your customer, keeping your data secure as you interact with them? And we're finding that to be a pretty interesting niche of what we just happen to solve out of the box of you've got this whole dynamic of your business that candidly a lot of people just say, hey, we just kind of wing it. We either just give them information and hope they do the right thing with it, or we're buying devices for them and we just never expect to see them again. But bringing solutions like that and then help people justify the cost, because you're opening new channels while securing it, but you're also enabling those productivity solutions that people are doing more, combining with that solution, but they're getting more done and they're embracing the technology, and you're more productive, and that's ultimately what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, I mean the productivity is really you're on the right thread there. The productivity is a big deal because when you look at one of the major buying reasons for security is of course downtime. I don't want downtime in my organization. Right? You got a question, or you want to make a point? Good, Jack.
ROI, there are some categories of security products that I would say would have immediate ROI in terms of help desk time. How much time does our help desk spend helping users set up their email on their phones or reset their passwords?
Yeah.
So identity management, mobility management, you can measure the number of hours saved from password resets and email setup, and that's one place where maybe you could find more direct ROI calculation.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. I have a carrier customer or a carrier supplier who deals with voice over IP security, talk about voice, and they've calculated the hundreds of thousands of dollars of downtime when the voice network goes down that they lose, right? So for them, it's a very simple calculation. So to Jack's point, there are hard numbers out there that you folks have access to Jack's point, and to everybody here on the stage, that you should be thinking about. Yes, security costs money. Yes, sometimes it's hard to measure, my insurance policy and what my insurance policy investment strategy is, which is a very funny way to look at it. But you still have numbers, and I think that's one of the biggest things that you as technologists and technology buyers need to think about. What is the cost? Just to, like Jack said, and like everybody on the stage says, what is the cost of not having this? And what's the exposure that I have? So my last question, I'm going to keep it relatively short, is around compliance. We touched on a little bit about GDPR and HIPAA and SOX. How are you helping clients kind of expedite their compliance adherence in organizations?
Yeah, I mean,
And try to keep it relatively short so we leave a minute or two, please.
again, with the way we focus with, with a mobile workspace, kind of separated out from the MDM and UEM type of technologies, we've got an interesting play in the GDPR space in particular with that whole right to be forgotten. It just falls in naturally with our approach. So that's one aspect that we go kind of straight on, to people and can help them with that aspect in particular. But outside of that, just by the nature of what we all do, compliance and security just go hand in hand. If you can get people utilizing the technology in the appropriate way.
And give them the analytics.
So
they actually can show from an analytics standpoint.
It's the proper audit trails. But most importantly, if your technology can prove or show that the data is being utilized out as it's expected and in no other ways, and you can have those assurances, you're simplifying that whole compliance aspect. But it's the challenge for all of us is how do we make sure people are comfortable that your solution is doing that?
Yeah, thank you.
And I think you have two aspects, right? So as vendors, we need to make sure we are in compliance, right? And our specific products are in compliance. And that is the first step in making our customers comfortable that we know what we're doing. And then it's how does our solution, so in the case of what I'm representing today, right, unified endpoint management, how can my products help you maintain GDPR compliance, if you will?
Or
Could be
HIPAA
any
or
regulation,
SOX.
or HIPAA or SOX.
Whatever the
right?
flavor of the month is, like you were talking
Correct.
about.
And across mobile, there's certain things you can certainly do in relation to the guidelines, right? And they map specifically to the guidelines. So in our business, we would sit down with someone who has questions around GDPR. We'd show them the breakdown on what aspects we help with, what aspects we don't help with, and that's their responsibility. At a broader IBM scale, right, we have literally teams of people that will fly out to location and help customers, be in compliance with GDPR. So it really depends on if it's a specific product, we try to make them comfortable that we know what we're doing. Our product's in line with GDPR. Here's how we help you in these specific areas. And if it's a company that needs folks to fly in to get them GDPR ready, we do that too.
Real short, we have a product within our suite that will, one check, it'll run through any number of compliance scenarios, PCI, HIPAA, what have you, ISO, and it'll check your policies and your products, checkpoint products against those policies and industry best practices, and give you a nice little report.
Yeah. Awesome. I want to add some quick, actually, you mentioned policies, which triggered something that I talked about during the keynote. And very quickly, when you look at how do you know which security policies on your mobile devices would help you get better aligned with GDPR or HIPAA, as an example? We came out with AI and a cognitive policy recommendation engine. And so what we're not saying is, we're not saying this is the GDPR template that works for all of our customers. But you can imagine if you're a company with international business, creating your security policies across, 300 other companies that are at your size and at your scale, and all of those companies are also having to comply with GDPR, right? That policy will be very close from the get-go, from the start of getting you in compliance, GDPR as this example.
Awesome. Troy, you got 2 seconds now.
2 seconds.
I'm just
So I'm not allowed to do a product pitch, but I just want to point out that Gryphon didn't have to send any emails to their customers about our new privacy policy. So if that doesn't excite you, I don't know.
That's a good point.
I don't have much else to add about GDPR specifically. I mean, obviously, it's about helping our customers understand what maybe their roles and responsibilities are for these things, making sure our technology complies with this. Gryphon is a privacy company. This is, we were quite pleased with some of the movement that went on there. There's some interesting things that came out of that. Politicians looking to forget themselves a lot, we saw right away. But these types of things are interesting. But yeah, I think, I don't have much more to add than these gentlemen here. So, yeah.
All right, so we are at the end of our time, but I want to leave room for a question. Is there a mic around somewhere in the room? Anywhere? No? Well, you can talk loudly. Oh, there's a mic back there. Any questions that we can answer or discuss with the audience? Oh, there's one over there. Thank you. And while you guys are waiting, look my way. Gotta get a picture. Come on, over here. Over here. There you go, come on. There you go. Thank you. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Okay. This is R.V. Rao from Acro. One one thing I noticed that so far nobody has talked about blockchain technology as one of the possible tools for security with respect to both during transmission, during storage, and providing trust for documents such as underwriting policies or deeds and those kind of things.
I think it's an interesting question. I mean, I'm not yet convinced that blockchain has shown a real application, outside of crashing cryptocurrencies. My portfolio looks pretty bad right now, so I'm a little disappointed in it. But
You mean your securities? Edit securities?
planning on retiring. But it's definitely an interesting technology. I know there's some blockchain applications that are out there and some projects that are looking at security technologies. From our perspective around privacy, I know there's one called Substratum around private browsing and I guess obfuscating who you are using blockchain. It doesn't make a terrible amount of sense compared to maybe some other technologies, though, in some situations. I think payment remediation makes a lot of sense. You see a lot of that happening in the banking industry. I mean, that's what Ripple was for the banks and what they're trying to solve for their delays in sending information. But by and large, I'm still haven't seen a compelling case for blockchain technology from a security application perspective for a lot of companies. Now, I could very well be wrong, but we were talking about this before. There's all sorts of new wonderful innovations that I just go, what do we need it for?
What problem are we solving? Are we creating a problem for a new solution?
Right, a new attack surface, right? Again, another challenge of blockchain. Public ledger, it's out there. There's another attack surface. Are you using a post-quantum encryption algorithm in your blockchain because we think that that's going to be a vulnerability in the next 5 to 10 years? There's a lot of unknowns still in that. So it'll be interesting to see how that evolves, but I don't really have an answer. I just like to talk about it, I guess.
All right.
I don't have an answer to that. I know that within Checkpoint, we're always looking at newer technologies. The guys don't sleep over in Israel when it comes to researching. So I would imagine that if there's a security aspect to it that can be productized, we're looking at it.
Yeah. So. And your customers have a problem and they want to solve that way. Jonathan?
Yeah, and I'm from an IBM perspective, I'm not the blockchain expert, which is why I don't want to contribute too much to this question. I will say, though, there are many units inside IBM that are investing plenty of resources towards that. And there is the potential there. I'm just not the one to represent it here at this event.
That's fine. Brian?
Yeah, I mean, similar response. We're obviously keeping an eye on it, trying to learn as much as we can, and candidly, I'm doing everything I possibly can to somehow work it into my marketing part of the aspect, because your valuation goes up as soon as you say blockchain. But in all seriousness, I mean, we're obviously watching.
Honesty award, I like it.
What's that?
The honesty award, I like it.
So yeah, not much to add other than what these guys said.
Sorry, we answered a little bit, but maybe not as much as you wanted. Sorry. Any other questions that you have? Phil's back there with a microphone waiting away. Thank you, Phil. Sorry, we're running a little bit over. We're trying not to eat.
Plenty of time. Plenty of time.
Right.
A quick question for you. Over the years in security, you've seen the security paradigm of protecting the perimeter shrink, and it's gone from the perimeter down to the device, and now you're starting to see more security experts protecting the data itself as opposed to the environment it's in. What do you see coming up in the future to assist in making that paradigm happen?
One of the things that we see a lot is actually controlling interfaces and interfaces that you're using for specific transmission. Because the attack surface has become so broad, from your perimeter security, your endpoint security, your data security, trying to simplify this seems to be the most effective way in our mind of how we can try to control it. And if you can control the interface of what's going on, you know exactly what you expect on that interface. And so when I say maybe it's a specific VPN session where we only expect to see this specific type of data and throughput there, we have a better view into the complete life cycle of that data and the transmission of that data, and any type of anomalies that come out of that can be identified more easily. That's one of the ways that we think about simplifying the communications and controlling what's going on. And we think that segmenting these things makes it a lot easier to manage small things than large organizational bits of data and things across all these different areas when you can't tell if it's a piece of information that is maybe rogue or if it's maybe something that somebody's doing a bit different. And then you get into all these behavioral analytics and AI to try to solve that, which I think is overcomplicating things a little bit, and not always, but I think we want to try to simplify how we recognize the risks that go on as much as we can. Hope that wasn't too vague in terms of the answer, but that's sort of our perspective on it.
I think it's the whole OSI stack, right? To be a geek for a minute, when you look at networking and you look at the 7 layers of networking, well, there's layer 8, which is people, right? So, think about, you've got people out there that are using data, that are using the applications that are going to be, within the analytics. These are things you need to think about when the ripples in the pond of security. It isn't just the rock where it goes in, it's the concentric ripples, right? Yeah, it's getting smaller, but it's actually getting bigger because all the networking and all the data is expanding now throughout the ripples that go when you're using your network and devices and applications. Sorry.
So on your question, you're always going to have a layered approach. The more technology that comes out, the more entry points and security windows that it opens up that you can be attacked from. When you're talking about protecting the data, you also have to look at who has access to it, right? So then you have to protect against that layer 8. Sorry, I didn't mean to in your face there. That layer 8, right?
Tough.
So your end users are going to be your weakest link. So how do you protect them yet let them do their business, et cetera? Right, and then there's another point here that as you add these layers, now you've got all this data, all these entry points coming in that you have to pay attention to. You're going to have, I beg to disagree, behavioral analytics to look at. Well, now I've got to look at my website logs. I got to look at my user tracking logs. I got to look at this. I got to look at that. As a human being, you can't possibly ingest all this data and figure out it's a targeted attack. So you have to use a really good SIM or some kind of intelligence behind the scenes to assist you in your work to protect your data.
Including automation. Automation figures in there too.
Yeah. So you have your policy, you have your detection, user behaviors. I completely agree with everything you've said. And then you need your policy orchestration and everything else that happens after that, or to remediate automatically the most you can, right? So that's an element needed. But I'll provide a different aspect, right? We can try to simplify it, but it's just getting more and more complicated, right? Because there's more and more endpoints, data, users. So the perimeter is way the heck out there. Right? Instead of securing the perimeter is everywhere, right? Everything is now the perimeter. So where does the data sit? Where do the endpoints sit, right? And I think you have different systems and functions, again, whether they sit on the cloud, on-prem, hybrid, multiple clouds, multiple on-premises, right? And when you're trying to detect incidents that are happening, what do you have in place that's actually being able to look across all of that data, regardless of where it sits, right? And to be able to correlate events across that information and then take action and orchestration against it, right? And I think that's where we're headed, is the ability to, I don't care whether this system you have sits in your data center, another system you have sits in someone else's cloud, another sits in an IBM cloud, but when there's incidents that are happening, being able to correlate endpoint data across all of those systems, whether it's end user data, it doesn't matter, right? Endpoint data, be able to correlate that, orchestrate it, and take action on it.
And use my favorite word in security, remediation.
Yes.
It's a dirty word, right? It's like, oh, remediate, oh my God. I wrote a blog about that a couple of years ago. I laughed about it. So, sorry, Phil, one last point from Brian.
Yeah, I know we're running over, so I'll keep it quick, but I do appreciate the question because it goes into the heart of what SyncDog does, especially, again, when it comes to the mobility side of it with mobile devices. Because as we always say, now that you can buy a smart device at a 7-Eleven, do organizations even care about the device anymore? But clearly, everybody cares about the data. So our approach is just that. If you want a password to get on your phone, who cares? But when it comes to accessing sensitive data or corporate data, that's where you really want that tight encryption and that tight foundation built around that data that if somebody wants to go check in on a flight, look at Instagram, do whatever else they want on their phone, it doesn't matter. But when it comes time to access that data, you want to make sure that's encrypted at rest, in transit, and not allowing these inherently insecure devices to poke holes in firewalls and get access internally. So we go to great lengths to make sure that that data, when it's out on mobile devices, is highly protected, and we're not allowing, some of the malware and things like that that are out there that are hitting the devices to come into the environment where your corporate data is.
Or inherently insecure people in shadow IT. I mean, it isn't just the devices,
Insecure
right?
people working on insecure devices.
Oh, you got it. I like it. Double entendre. Phil, any other questions? You want to cut it off here? Yep. All right. So we're over time. I thank you very much for your attention and your questions. Thank you to the panel for your great responses and insight. And Phil, over to you.
There's the door.
Thank you all.